Hi, everyone. It has been a bad week for free speech and television and creativity in general. Trump's winged monkey, a man who has been described as a human pool cue, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, has been back in the headlines again for his crackdown on alleged liberal bias in television. Once again, a late-night television host is in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. This time, it's Stephen Colbert, who was advised by his own network lawyers this week not to air an interview he conducted with Democratic Texas Senate candidate James Tallarico. Now, Colbert went ahead and posted the interview with Tallarico to YouTube, where it's gotten nearly 6 million views as of this recording. And he talked all about all of this on air, ensuring that, yes, Colbert's interview with James Tallarico would very much see the light of day, while also utterly humiliating his corporate bosses at the very same time. But the war, Trump's war on comedy and culture and creativity, ain't over yet. Trump is intent on either silencing or sledgehammering anything that stands in his way, whether metaphorically or physically. We see this in his battle against comedians like Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. We see it in Trump's threats directed at their corporate bosses like NBC and ABC and CBS, in his attacks on musicians like Bad Bunny for performing at the Super Bowl halftime show in Spanish. But we also see it in his attempts to remake and rebuild structures and institutions that tell a story he doesn't like, or at least ones that don't tell his story. Trump's war on the arts, his war against creative expression and independence, extends to all areas of the arts, including and especially public spaces and institutional architecture, where we are seeing perhaps the most ridiculous expressions of Trump's ego gone wild.
In our first gathering of the MAGA Commission, Make America Beautiful Again Commission.
Make America Beautiful Again. There's also the spin-off executive order, Making Federal Architecture Beautiful Again. For more on that, here's the president on NBC last week.
I think we need glamour brought back to our country. We need prestige. We need beauty brought. I mean, in addition to everything else, we need strength. We need all of those things. Like I'm doing an arc, a triumphal, they call it a triumphal arc. 57 cities have arcs. Yeah. We're the only major important city. Washington, D.C. should have maybe the first arc. Yeah. We're doing one that will be more magnificent and larger than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris.
L'Arc de Trump, a structure which would completely dwarf the nearby Lincoln and Jefferson memorials and potentially imperil DC air traffic. It's right up there on the list of impossibly terrible ideas, alongside Trump's $400 million ballroom, his remodeling of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, now known as the Trump Kennedy Center, which Trump is shuttering for 2 years to renovate, his destruction of the White House Rose Garden, his gold leafing of the Oval Office, his Walk of Fame in the West Colonnade of the White House, and his plans to put a resurrected statue of Christopher Columbus on the White House South Lawn. This is a full frontal assault on art and on history and on good taste. So where are the safeguards against all this? It will not surprise you to learn that Donald Trump has rigged the system designed to protect against precisely this sort of onslaught by installing loyalists on the boards that approve what can be built in Washington and what cannot. Just this week, Trump put his 26-year-old executive assistant on DC's Commission of Fine Arts. I'm sure that person is highly qualified. But as we'll discuss today, when it comes to making changes to the country's most historical structures, well, it turns out that deference to history and artistry was actually just a gentleman's agreement this whole time. And Donald Trump is no gentleman. I'm Alex Wagner, and this week on Runaway Country, Donald Trump is waging a war on the arts. We see this battle playing out in late night, at halftime shows, but also in Trump's attempt to change the fundamental physical character of the nation's capital and to rewrite the story it tells. To put this all in context, we're going to get into the rich history of the nation's capital and what fascists usually do when they start screwing around with architecture, as a guide. So we're talking to the best in the business, the great Heather Cox Richardson.
The difference between trying to make something out of rock as opposed to trying to make something in the memory of people is really, in a sense, a difference between whether your legacy can be destroyed and whether it will live forever.
Heather is an author and historian whose daily Substack, Letters from an American, is essential and required reading, which is why basically the whole country subscribes to it, and you should too. But first, we wanted to talk to someone whose job is designing buildings and understanding the character of a built environment. Neil Flanagan is an architect and a scholar in residence at the Heinrich Museum in Washington, D.C. He joined our show to talk about what this all looks like, both literally and figuratively, and why Trump's actions are more in the vein of Nicholas II than Joseph Stalin. Here's my conversation with Neil. Neil, thank you for doing this. So let's start with, I think, the most recent development as it concerns Trump's attempts to refashion the landscape of the nation's capital, the Arc de Triomphe, I guess we're calling it, something in that vein. What was your gut reaction when you heard about Trump's plans for the Arc or the Arch, as both, an architect and as someone who lives in the Capitol?
So as far as projects that Trump is proposing, I think it really encapsulates exactly what's been going on, which is there's people think that they can work with him or somehow get his ear and get a project going, and then he will take it and develop it into a massive project of self-aggrandizement. It would be essentially twice the height of DC's very famous height limit on the approach to National Airport. And it's going to be very heavy. And so from an architecture standpoint, the foundations alone could be a major technical challenge, to say nothing of any of the aesthetic impacts.
You talk about some of the concerns, independent of the aesthetic ones, that attend this proposal. And one of them is there seem to be real potential issues with the Arc being in the flight path of planes that are coming in and out of that area, right? I mean, we already know there was that tragic, deadly crash over the Potomac. That's a very kind of fraught piece of airspace. Is it my understanding that if you're flying into Washington, D.C., this would be not only very visible from a plane, but potentially interrupt the actual plane path itself? Like, help me understand what it might practically look like.
The flight issue is one that I haven't seen discussed much, and I've had buildings in that area where we had to get FAA clearance. So it is something that you generally would go to the FAA, who has obviously the real data on this. But I would say it's very unusual. I mean, 250 feet, I think that might be almost as high as the Amazon project that was proposed in Arlington. So it's a very, very tall building for the area. And I think this sort of indicates maybe they haven't thought everything through. But I think they're pretty typical for what we're seeing. There's a kind of,
I can't imagine. Imagine. There's
an attitude that Trump is necessary. He's ridiculous, or he is, scheming, methodical. If the architecture projects is building up his ego and sort of fitting this attitude he has towards being a builder of magnificent structures. But the systems that will implement them are clearly competent. We see that all over the East Wing in particular. The architects involved and the engineers and the contractor are all very competent. So you can sort of laugh at it, but that doesn't mean it won't happen.
Well, we know from the demolition of the East Wing that even as absurd as it may seem, I mean, Trump's very serious about these proposals and is acting on them. Just ask the former First Lady's office. His deadlines for a lot of these bigger proposals are, as you mentioned, the semi-quincentennial, which was today years old when I realized that was the word for the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But that is really soon. That's July 4th, 2026. I mean, there's no way an arc of that size could be constructed in that time. And even the East, I mean, like, none of this stuff seems like it's actually practically, I mean, from an architectural standpoint, that seems an impossibility, right?
I don't think any of these projects can reasonably be completed for the actual, July 4th, 2026. That's not happening. I think, the idea of building this new ballroom within 3 years, it's feasible. The Arc, again, is really massive. So even if they wanted to do it out of, plaster, whatever, or 3D printing something, which was floated at one point, I think at this point it's completely unfeasible.
Oh my God, if only it was made out of a 3D printer. That would just be like the chef's kiss on all of this. I mean, all of this begs the question, how is any of this legal? And you wrote a great and enlightening piece in The Atlantic about the construction may be against the people's will, but it's not really against the law. Can you talk a little bit more about the honor system that has basically guided previous presidencies as far as making additions or changes to structures that have stood the test of history, like the White House?
Yeah, so I think it's actually really, really important to make a distinction between projects that are at the White House itself and everywhere else in DC. Everywhere else in DC, there is a very, very robust review process. It takes a long time to do anything, and you have to comply particularly with, environmental impact statements. Something called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires a certain kind of review. You have to go through this board called the National Capital Planning Commission. You have to go through another board called the Commission of Fine Arts. And then there's a third board if you're doing a memorial called the NCMAC. And this all gets very drawn out. So for the Smithsonian Castle, they have had for the Smithsonian, the Section 106 process, I think they've had 13 meetings. And it's been going on for in various forms for at least 5-6 years. So that is the kind of thing that you would expect. However, what really is tricky is that the boards that are created to review these projects, the Commission of Fine Arts and the National Capital Planning Commission, are both full of members who are appointed by the president. The majority of votes on the National Capital Planning Commission are appointed by the president. The Commission of Fine Arts is entirely appointed by the president. If you've been paying attention, you know that Trump fired all the members that were appointed by Biden and has appointed a new slate of members who are very strict loyalists and don't particularly have the strongest qualifications. So there's not really much actually constraining the president, except for what I call in this article a gentleman's agreement. They've all basically been following this what we call in architecture a partie, which is that you have the mansion in the center, and then you have this low subordinate expanse, and then two low subordinate wings. Trump has just sort of realized there's there's nothing binding about that. And particularly when you look at his ability to control the panels and this certain sort of vagueness about whether demolition is actually a work of the government. So he's just been able to just, as everyone saw, he just demolished the wing. People watched it.
The horror of that was something that became national news. And I guess my question is, do you think, like with Trump's other attempts to demolish parts of our government, for example, the federal bureaucracy or environmental regulations, he's been given a blueprint, if you will, by organizations like the Heritage Foundation. But with this, it seems like this is Trump, the real estate developer. Like this is the area, like demolition and rebuilding and renovating, if that's what you can call it, are actually in his bailiwick. It's like the one thing he knows about. And because there are no particular safeguards to stop him, this is where it feels like he's just taking a lifetime's worth of real estate development lessons and applying them to the White House. Right? Like it's not like that there was some master plan that he inherited to renovate the White House that like conservatives had been dreaming up for the last 10 to 15 years. This is just really feels like an expression of Trump's lust for building and demolition.
I completely agree. And I think that's really what we're seeing. It's a classic New York City developer technique. It's developer technique everywhere. You want to build something without a little bit less fuss, demolish things before even proposing the plan. 101 stuff. So I think we definitely see that. And I agree that this is really about sort of a personal self-aggrandizement. I was thinking about, people sort of, well, is he trying to build his massive, glorious imperial complex? And I don't think so. I think his aesthetic seems to draw on these Gilded Age mansions. He likes building things. So the degree to which he's building, I think is much closer as it's sort of fun for him. And that's why I say it's like libidinal. It gives you the thrill. It has some kind of psychological value. And he seems to also really enjoy the reactions he gets from posting about these projects, whether or not they actually occur. I think it's less about some sort of grand authoritarian scheme, so much as just a sort of self-indulgent autocrat in the vein of like, a 19th century monarch or Nicholas II rather than Stalin,
That was Neil Flanagan, an architect and public historian in Washington, D.C. Next up, historian Heather Cox Richardson will put this all into context right after these quick messages. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It helps more people find this show, and it supports the progressive media ecosystem that we are building here at Crooked Media HQ. Plus, I would just personally really appreciate it. Runaway Country is brought to you by Honey Love. So do we talk about bras enough? We don't, but they are a huge part of a woman's wardrobe. Of anybody that needs that support, like a great brassiere will change your day. It'll change your outfit. Honestly, I have outfits that have been greatly improved or suffered from a bad bra. Honeylove makes something called the crossover bra. There is no underwire in it, but it just still magically lifts and supports. It does not pinch into my back. So if you're like wearing a tight t-shirt, you can just, it's like seamless. Your back looks smooth. There are no red lines or pressure points. It has a smoothing back panel, I believe. I'm not a bra mechanic, but that is what I'm told by the Honeylove designers, a smoothing back panel. And honestly, it is the only bra that I don't rip off when I get home. It's not like I come through the house and rip my bra off. That would be super weird. But it's comfortable enough to watch the Great British Bake Off in with my children. Treat yourself to the most advanced bras and shapewear on the market. Use our exclusive link to save 20% off Honeylove at honeylove.com/Alex. That is honeylove.com/Alex. After you check out, they will ask where you heard about Honeylove. Please support this show, Runaway Country, and tell them we sent you. Experience the new standard in comfort and support with Honeylove. Runaway Country is brought to you by ZBiotics. This year, I am focusing on small shifts that make a huge difference. Effortless presence. Did you hear that? Effortless presence. It sounds counterintuitive, but for me, that means planning ahead so that I can truly live in the moment, especially when enjoying a few drinks. My simple trick for staying balanced is taking ZBiotics pre-alcohol before I start. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists, not scientists without PhDs, to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct and not dehydration that is to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you will feel your best tomorrow. I will say, every time I drink these ZBiotics prebiotics, I feel better. I notice a difference the next day. And when I forget them, I am bummed. Even after a night out, I can confidently plan on dealing with two crazy children, making custom sandwiches that do or do not involve mayonnaise, and then maybe even working out the next day. How's that? And then also doing a job. I can do that all without worry because I've prepared myself for effortless presence. Are you ready to try it? Go to zbiotics.com/Alex now. You'll get 15% off your first order when you use Alex at checkout. Plus, it is backed by a 100% money-back guarantee, so there's not a risk. Subscriptions are also available for maximum consistency. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Alex and use the code Alex at checkout for 15% off. So Heather, we began this episode speaking with an architect about the implications of all this building and demolition in Trump's name. And, as someone who's born and raised in Washington, D.C., I have particular and deep-seated affection for the monuments and the sort of cultural map of Washington, D.C. But it's astounding to me, and I think it's astounding to people who didn't even grow up in DC, the way in which he's trying to reinvent the nation's capital in his own image, right? We obviously know about the Ballroom. There's this planned Arc de Triomphe, I guess we could say, across the river, which is going to be paid for with apparently a corporate slush fund. Also, shout out to Napoleon, who built the Arc de Triomphe and was not exactly a champion of democracy. There's the renaming and rebuilding and the closure of the Kennedy Center. All of it reminds me of Mussolini, but like with even less taste. I wonder how you understand this kind of impulse to really brand himself all over the city in the context of history, and specifically fascist and dictatorial history.
In addition to the things that he is trying to put up with his name on them, which you've identified, remember, he's also taking down a lot of buildings from our histories. So there's a real attempt to rework the DC map for sure. I think it's interesting in a number of ways. First of all, when we think about it, I do think it's important that he is a real estate developer and that he is a man whose brain is clearly deteriorating. And so it often seems to me that the things that he's trying to do in DC are sort of pushed in front of him by members of his staff who want to distract him, who want to calm him, who want to give him space that he's really comfortable in. And you can see him if you watch him, how much more animated he gets when he talks about tearing down the East Wing of the White House, for example.
He's out there with a hard hat. Like, when was the last time Trump gave a shit about anything to go on site and visit it? He falls asleep when he talks about dismantling the EPA, but you get him talking about the East Wing Ballroom and he's all ears.
And the East Wing Ballroom is, again, something a little bit different that's interesting here, not just about the sort of Mussolini impulse that you're suggesting. And that is, if you remember the timing of the tearing down of the East Wing, it came immediately after, it was on a Monday, after the Saturday on which there was a giant No Kings rally across the country. And it seemed pretty clearly, to me anyway, that this was sort of narcissistic injury acting out and hurting the American people by literally attacking the people's house. There were no plans to put something else up yet. They didn't seem to have any kind of permits, any idea of what to do with any of the materials in that East Wing. They have ended up in the golf courses that he is also trying to take over in the DC area, some of that material anyway. And they didn't even seem to have any kind of covering for the openings that they had created. So this just seemed to be a temper tantrum. A child knocking down a block tower, if you will. Yeah. So there's also that aspect as well. But then there is the whole idea of creating a monument to oneself as president. And this is something that most presidents don't do. And for a very specific reason, right? In a democracy, the president is the servant of the people. They are not supposed to call attention to themselves through things like monuments. Or changing the White House or whatever. So this is a step away from the old idea of a democracy in which the president's legacy is written in the people, which I'd love to talk about, and instead to a different kind of sort of oligarchical authoritarian model where the president's legacy is supposed to be written in the physical buildings. And that itself is deeply problematic for a very unpopular president, because those statues and monuments will become, if they ever get built, and slush fund is an important word there that we can also talk about. If they ever get built, they will become objects of derision and places where people will vent their hatred of the guy by urinating on them or tearing them down or, doing things.
Those are marching orders, everyone. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, I'm trying to be a little bit delicate, but surely you have seen the memes, There'll be a line. Somebody said there'll be a line to all the way to California to come see, one of these things, because that'll be a line of people waiting to decorate it,
do their business.
Well,
but and I guess that's the sort of larger, like, maybe it's a bit too academic, but I think we should go there. The monuments tell the story of a nation, and I remember in the White House their presidential portraits, and I remember once I was there and I got to see Nixon's portrait is in a back staircase, but it's still hanging, right? And that's actually, it's important that it is, because we need to look that history squarely in the face. And I'm not at all a booster for the Arc de Triomphe, Trump, whatever we're calling it. But it also is a reminder of the tackiness and the self-absorption and the narcissism and the danger that represents the Trump presidency. And if it is built, as disgusting as it sounds, maybe it's important to remind ourselves that is very much someone this country elected twice, and that impulse lies within us. I don't know. How do you think about that in the context of history?
Well, you just touched on something really important there, and that's the rewriting of history that's going on not only through the monuments, but also quite literally in those portraits of presidents and the descriptions of them underneath them that Trump changed, I think it was within the last month, which are plaques that are his version of history that are, just completely ridiculous, with all of it insults and so on.
It's like a slam book. It's like a high school slam book that they put on the walls of the White House.
But we paid for that. That's one of the things that really infuriates me is, we pay, our tax dollars pay for that kind of crap to soothe his ego. And so that rewriting of history in literally not only in the buildings, but also in these plaques is part of this larger project to get rid of America's multicultural efforts to create a democracy that is just and equal, which is always a work in progress, believe me, and replace it with this idea of white nationalist theocracy or just white nationalism run by a guy like him. I mean, it's really a horrific, but also an interesting attempt to take 250 years of a certain kind of history and impose over it the right-wing reaction to that has always previously failed in our country.
I wonder if you have a theory on, I mean, this is asking you to be an art history professor a little bit, but maybe you'll take the bait. Why classical architecture, and also why ancient Rome? I mean, why do fascists?
I was going to say fascist. This is
like,
fascism.
why do fascists love classical architecture so much?
This is just straight up fascism. This is the idea of a government that projects strength. And by the way, this is not new to this administration.
No.
So the RNC convention, the Republican National Convention in 2020, was over the top fascist reflections, sort of the low shots into I think they were the Ionic columns, or were they Doric columns?
That's a great art history question.
I actually know the difference, but I don't remember which
they
were. In any case, these big columns, from below, all the flags. If you remember Trump walking out through this lower shot of him walking out through these doors opening, that is classic attempt of sort of fascistic art to make him look extraordinarily strong and as the leader of a strong state. So there is all that, sort of big blocky stuff. Actually, in that convention, Melania Trump, the first lady, wore clothing that had been designed by a fascist adjacent designer as well. That was designed. You may not remember this, but it looked a bit like a German World War II uniform.
Yes,
remember?
I do.
So there is that. I mean, there is also over that Trump has put an overlay of that gilded sort of gold everywhere look, which is much more sort of like the old French kings and is designed to show opulence. And of course,
that's Louis XIV. That's a bit Versailles, right?
Right.
The opulence being an extension of his own richesse and success, I guess.
But a lot of it maps anyway directly over polymer ornaments that you can get at a home superstore and spray paint gold. I don't know if you've seen that, but you can literally go and order these things for $49.99 and spray paint them. So you too could have a house that looks like, you could have a bathroom that looks like that.
The emperor wears no gold leaf or whatever. I mean, just he's also obsessed with the people thinking that it's not real gold. Like, I feel like we have either memes or videos of him being like, no, this is the real deal. I mean, but of course it's not. It might as well be a Home Depot thing with fake gold leaf overlay. When you talk about what he is resurrecting and what he is constructing, there is reporting that he is going to resurrect a statue of Christopher Columbus, that was taken down in Baltimore in a wave of kind of protest against, well, in the case of Columbus, genocide of a native population or an indigenous population, and part of a reconciling or a reckoning with America's racist past. Trump has, with the assistance of some, I think, supporters of his agenda in Baltimore, taken the pieces of the statue that was taken down in Baltimore, and they may be resurrecting it on the White House grounds. What do you make of that?
Well, of course, let's just start with, it's such an incredibly ahistorical thing to put Christopher Columbus at the White House, because if you want to go into that, we can. But I do think there's a difference between the past, the real history, the commemoration of history. So Columbus Day in the United States is a very different thing than Columbus was, because commemoration and history aren't really the same thing. And present politics, which is a really weird amalgam right now of a president who is mentally failing, who is all about kleptocracy and getting as much money as he possibly can, and who is panting for both domestic and international approval, and the people in his administration who are using him to impose white nationalism or theocracy on the United States. And those aren't all the same people. There's a whole bunch of different groups here, plus the tech bros who are trying to destroy American government for their own interests. So when you think about resurrecting a statue of Columbus and putting it on the White House, again, that doesn't have a lot to do with the history of the United States of America, which is rooted in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, although it's on the same land that Columbus sort of, I mean, I can't even really make that calculation, because what you're really looking at is the modern day way of Trump to support his white nationalist base and say, in this moment, I'm going to give you guys a cookie. And that cookie happens to be a statue of Columbus.
Well, I think it, in layman's terms, it's his way of owning the libs too, right? Like,
Totally.
oh, you guys with your people's history of the United States, fuck off. This is like, this guy did good things. He brought flying under European flag, claimed the Americas for Spain, and what followed was a decimation of the people who were here first, who happened to be brown. I mean, I think Trump loves that part of the Columbus story too, right? And championing that triumph of white genocide on brown people is also part of it, and knowing that it's so appalling and also terrorizing for people of color who remain in this country, right?
Do you think it was his idea, though? I mean,
I don't know.
That feels to me like it's got Stephen Miller written all over it. I mean,
but I'm sure Trump loved it. I mean, I think, as a New Yorker, I mean, and look, there's a separate strain of this, like in terms of Italian American history. There's a real movement to celebrate the legacy of Columbus, which I think exists separate and apart from what Trump's trying to do. But I think the sort of the broad strokes of what this Columbus statue represents now, is like really something that Trump enjoys. And in the same way, I want to talk about the Confederacy, because, Trump has made a very concerted effort to rename federal army bases that were named after Confederate heroes. I'm thinking Fort Bragg, Fort Hood, Fort Benning. There's a whole bunch of them that were renamed to, just because maybe our predominantly black and brown foot soldiers in the army don't want to be fighting at a base named for a Confederate soldier. And maybe we should revisit the ways in which we celebrate the legacy of the Old South on a national level.
Boy, that was mildly put. We should revisit the way we celebrate it. I mean, they lost. And they lost because they were trying to create a world in which some people were better than others and had the right to enslave those other people.
Exactly.
So the fact that their names are on any federal site is mind-boggling.
It is. And I think there's another part of that history that is less discussed. I'm wondering if you could weigh in on it, because I know that 20th century dictators, the Nazis, were very interested in post-Reconstruction segregation policies here in the United States, right? They were interested in Jim Crow. They were interested in latent, the sort of nascent eugenics movement in the United States, and indeed thought, what they're doing to Black people is interesting, but we need something a little bit more extreme for the Jewish population, which is inherently wealthier and more powerful in our Western European societies, but nonetheless looked to the policies of the racist United States as inspiration. And I wonder if you think the same might have held true for architecture, that the Confederate statues were an object, and the sort of the Confederacy writ large was inspirational to white nationalists abroad and elsewhere.
So I can't speak for other countries at all. I'm an Americanist through and through. And anything that touches on America, I can do. How other people chose their architecture, I can't begin, or their statuary, I can't begin to guess, except in the really large forms. Like when you see statues come down, you're looking at regime change, which is one of the reasons the pulling down of the Confederate statues in the United States always seemed to me to be an even bigger deal than people identified. But I just want to add to what you said there about the Nazi lawyers who constructed their own system of racial and ethnic hierarchies in Nazi Germany, because they did look to Jim Crow, but they also overwhelmingly looked to the American Indian reservations, the places in which the United States government had corralled indigenous Americans, because they recognized that those places were places of extraordinary disease, of lack of opportunity, and where you could really isolate people in such a way that you could push them toward an eventual extermination. And the Nazis were very, very into the American West. They spent a lot of time thinking about that, as well as about, Hitler was very fond of a book by a guy named Madison Grant that was published in 1916 in the US, that was essentially what the Great Replacement people are thinking about now, or talking about now. Even though the Great Replacement theory of the present comes from France largely, and some thinkers in France, but Hitler looked to this book by Madison Grant called The Passing of the Great Race, in which he talked about how the really great races were the Nordic races, and they had settled other white countries like England and so on, and those were being hurt by lesser white races. He wasn't yet worried overwhelmingly about Asians or Africans. He worried about Italians and Polish people and so on. And that idea and that book, Hitler actually referred to as his Bible.
Wow. More of my conversation with Heather in just a minute. But first, it is time to warm up for the midterms with sweatshirts from the Crooked Store. There are styles for everyone: crew necks, hoodies, zip-ups, and all black options for people who spill coffee on everything they wear. I feel seen. If you're looking for your election year emotional support sweatshirt, I particularly love the Call Congress crew neck, the America While Supplies Last zip-up, and the classic Crooked logo hoodie. Stop huddling around your overheating phone for warmth and pick up some cozy merch to help you get through this year. Head to crooked.com/store to shop sweatshirts. Runaway Country is brought to you by Fable. When so much of what we are surrounded by feels disposable, I really appreciate brands that take the opposite approach. Fable is a homeware brand built around the idea of fewer, better pieces, things you actually live with and use every day and keep for years. They make timeless, modern dinnerware, rugs, and glassware that are designed to last and not just look good on Instagram. Their ceramic dinnerware is hand-finished by artisans in Portugal using recycled and locally sourced clay, and it is made for real life. It is dishwasher, microwave, even oven safe. I literally just put a piece of Fable ceramicware in my microwave, and it is best in class. Their rugs are hand-woven from certified New Zealand wool. They are incredibly durable, and yes, they are machine washable. And their glassware, from Japanese glass to German crystal, has that beautiful balance of elegance and strength. Fable is also a certified B Corporation, which means their values are baked into how they operate, not just how they market. If you are thinking about refreshing your space as we move towards spring, I know. What did I just say? Spring. But it is coming. Screw the groundhog. Whether that is hosting or upgrading your everyday table or just making takeout feel a little bit more intentional, this is a great place to start. Visit fable.com/crooked and use code crooked20 for 20% off your order. That's fable.com/crooked, 20% off, and a better way to bring things home. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes it can feel like everyone else has it all together in their love lives. Am I right? Whether they're married or dating or single, the truth is that most of us are all still figuring it out, finding our way. And no matter where you are in your romantic journey of the heart, therapy can help you find your way, help you determine what you want, what feels heavy, and how you can take some pressure off yourself. Give yourself some grace. We get it. February is full of flowers and candy and stuffed animals, and of course, lots and lots of talk about relationships and dating. And no matter where you are, whether you're married or dating or single or just focusing on you, you are right on time. And therapy can help you find your way and see more clearly where you want to be. I know that therapy has been essential in every stage of all of my relationships, whether getting together with someone for the first time, breaking up with them, or just like in that liminal middle space where you're trying to just make sure you're doing the right thing with the right person. I cannot recommend it enough. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the US. BetterHelp does the initial matching work for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. A short questionnaire helps identify your needs and preferences, and their 12 plus years of experience and industry-leading match fulfillment rate means they typically get it right the first time. If you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time from their tailored recommendations. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 6 million people globally. And it works with an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for live sessions based on over 1.7 million client reviews. So sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/runawaycountry. That's betterhelp.com/runawaycountry. Runaway Country is brought to you by Helix. I got a Helix mattress over the holidays, and it is the best gift you can treat yourself to, truly. Sleeping has never been easier. And as a result, being awake has never been easier, despite everything that's going on these days. I got a firm mattress, and it was just what I was looking for. Not too hard and not too soft. Plus, it's a California king, so now I'm the envy of my friends and family, much like a king in California. Helix offers a variety of mattresses designed to fit your sleep needs. How will you know which Helix mattress works best for you and your body? Well, take the Helix Sleep Quiz. It matches you with the perfect mattress based on your personal preferences, making it easy to find a mattress that suits your sleep needs. Helix is the most awarded mattress brand, tested and reviewed by experts like Forbes and Wired. Helix will deliver your mattress right to your door with free shipping in the U.S. The Happy with Helix guarantee offers a risk-free, customer-first experience designed to ensure that you're completely satisfied with your new mattress. You can rest easy with seamless returns and exchanges. They even offer a 120-night sleep trial and limited lifetime warranty. Go to helixsleep.com/Alex for 27% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Alex for 27% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name, Runaway Country, after checkout so they know we sent you. This offer is exclusive to our listeners. helixsleep.com/Alex.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Sure, of course.
You said you liked, you grew up in DC. What were your favorite monuments and why?
Oh, the Lincoln Memorial, like forever and always a Lincoln Memorial. I mean, we were really nerds. We would go to the Lincoln Memorial at night and just, it's so beautiful. And of course, Lincoln, I mean, I think growing up in Washington, D.C., the city with northern hospitality and southern efficiency, as we say, south of Mason-Dixon, D.C., especially when I was growing up, was a very Black city, and it was very tight. Like you'd feel the Southern influence of DC, but of course it was the seat of the federal government. And so that has this Northern quality as well. And so the Civil War, I think, given the history of in and around Washington, DC, but also its tug between North and South, I think was particularly resonant. And that museum is absolutely beautiful. There's just something, that monument is so beautiful. I remember every year, I think maybe this was unique to DC, we had to construct a monument in like social studies class. We had to make one out of cardboard. None of us did a very good job, but I think like every year for 3 years, I picked the Lincoln Memorial. And then when we were in high school, it's something about the glow and the size of the statue and the word, the words carved inside the building and the fact that it was open all the time, which was so beautiful. And it was really, it felt really special to grow up in Washington, D.C. and to have those monuments be part of our lived experience, right? Not just something that you would see when you came to visit with your family, but that it would be a Thursday night and we'd roll down there at 10 o'clock at night. That part of growing up in D.C. was extraordinary. And I think the monuments were such a huge part of it. Like we never went to the National Gallery of Art in our free time, but on summer nights or even in the winter, there was something really special about being on the mall at night and just feeling like it was our playground as people who lived in that district. So yeah, I mean, so when you hear about all the stuff that Trump is trying to do, it's nauseating thinking about, living with those monuments on a sort of quotidian level and how special that was and how he's trying to desecrate those memories and the specialness of that.
Well, so I just got back from Washington last night. And like you, every time I am there, I go see Father Abraham. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. It is worth pointing out that monument is where it is because, of course, it is down the hill from Arlington National Cemetery, which was deliberately put on Robert E. Lee's plantation. So they put dead bodies right up to his house to say, you did this. And that Arc de Triomphe, which is what Trump has been calling it, which is this weird amalgam of the French and the English, would completely overshadow Lincoln.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is interesting about this whole push toward the monuments is I've thought a lot about this and legacy, because usually presidents care a lot about their legacy. Mm-hmm. And And they don't start building buildings. And many of them, I think, don't even like the idea of these libraries, because I don't know if people know this, but they have to raise their own money for those libraries. It's endless. And the last thing you want to do as a retired president is hit people up for library money. But what they do, and what the greats have done, like Lincoln, like LBJ, the people we remember, the FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, the name, as opposed to Chester Arthur or
Garfield.
Well, Garfield was assassinated, so you can't hold out on him. Although, and he probably would have been a good president. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to tell you about a different memorial I just saw this weekend. But they worked to build a monument in the American people. They worked to make their legacy be that people would think back on them as people who had elevated and put more guardrails around American democracy to protect the people. And the difference between trying to make something out of rock as opposed to trying to make something in the memory of people is really, in a sense, a difference between whether your legacy can be destroyed and whether it will live forever. Mm-hmm. And I think the difference there between like rock and myth matters in memory.
Yeah, that's a beautiful comparison.
So you may not know this. I did not. I went to Washington with my husband. We were doing some stuff down there, and he is really, really good at being a tour guide. Like, this is his thing.
I'm not surprised somehow, Heather.
Well, you know what he does? I mean, he knows the areas anyway, because he loves history, but he goes on Instagram and looks at the local hashtags to see like where the locals hang out.
Yeah.
Or things that other people wouldn't necessarily know. You can still see in Washington, D.C., Mary Surratt's boarding house where they plotted to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. And it looks just the freaking same.
Really?
The whole block.
Where is it? Do you remember?
I do remember exactly where it is. It's very close to what used to be the patent office near Capital One Arena is what people would know. But you should go to the art museum while you're there too. It's now a Chinese restaurant. It's right, when you go and there's that big Chinese arch.
Yep, for Chinatown.
It's on that street. It's maybe a 3-minute walk from that. And if you walk through it, it's on the right-hand side, and it's white in a block of buildings. And as I say, it's a Chinese restaurant now. But if you look at old pictures, they have basically not changed it except to put a Chinese neon sign on it.
Isn't that the story of America?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that it? And like, some people look at that and they're like, God, that's great. Like, we live and breathe, right? We continue to change. We continue to evolve. There are new waves of immigrants who come in here and change things. And that's the story of America, right? And then other people will look at that and be like, what a desecration of history. Like, this should be.
No, history's alive. And
exactly.
You know what? She had a boarding house full of immigrants. Like this was, and guys who had jobs in the town. They were obviously had too much time on their hands on, April 14th, 1865. But I kind of like that. But it's cool to see because you're right down there. And if you just go around the corner, it's not that far at all. It's Ford's Theater, because that was the area where all the boarding houses were. And that's where the theater was. And, one thing led to another.
Yeah, one thing sure did lead to another. I want to just zoom out a little bit from the specific focus on, the physical way in which Trump bears all the hallmarks of a classic authoritarian. And just get your thoughts on this particular moment. And we're at a really interesting set of weeks where it feels like, I don't know, the frisson of change a bit. I don't know. I'm thinking, like, on one hand, right, we have had the Attorney General of the United States testifying on the Hill and attacking members of Congress verbally, right? And it seems like carrying evidence that the Department of Justice was spying on members of Congress as they were in secure facilities reading unredacted copies of the Epstein files. We have the DOJ being, repeatedly trying to seek criminal indictments against perceived enemies and being sort of rejected by grand juries who infamously will indict a ham sandwich. There's the seizure of ballots in Fulton County and a lawsuit attending that. There's the super dear leadery behavior of Trump falling asleep like all the time. Every time I see coverage of him, it just reminds me so much of like late stage Castro. But then, we have Operation Metro Surge, which is probably the biggest sort of like jackbooted federal thugs operation that we've been treated to publicly and that has promoted the greatest outrage. That's coming to an end. That's being withdrawn, right?
Allegedly,
right. Fair enough. There's a withdrawal, a quiet withdrawal of national troops from LA and Portland and Chicago. There is Congress pushing back on Trump in his signature tariffs. There's the slightly older element of Jay Powell telling Trump to fuck off and trying to oust him as Fed chair. How do you see this moment? Like, is change afoot? Is something different in this moment? Like, on one hand, it feels like it's very, very dire, but on the other, it feels like the resistance is I don't know, potentially more effective than it has been in previous years.
I do think the resistance has found its footing, in part because of what happened in Minneapolis and the reality there that what effectively dismantled a fascist takeover was just people being good to their neighbors, which feels very much within reach to a lot of people in a way that, marching on the Capitol might not. I do think we are in a moment that does look like there's going to be extraordinary change. On the one hand, there is, I think, a very strong movement in the US government and in a number of places around the world to create a world in which a very few elites monopolize resources by leveraging the power of their governments that sort of make their own club that rules the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And part of that is things like the Epstein files, the fact that so many of them have the goods on each other that they can't turn on each other. And that is very real, and they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power. So you're already seeing money pour into the US 2026 elections. You're seeing the attempt to push through the SAVE Act, which would throw, people are estimating, more than 20 million Americans off the voting rolls. You're seeing the use of the military in new and very frightening ways. I am beside myself over the concentration camps around the country, where we are only now starting to see a window into what's happening there. Not only is that horrible for the people that are incarcerated, but also when you build a system which is extraordinarily valuable. I was actually looking yesterday at the projected profits for 2026 from some of the big corporations that are private prisons, and they're expecting to make billions, to profit billions of dollars. That's not net, that's profit. That is very real and could become our future for not just us, but for the world. But what we have seen in this second of Trump's term, but also I think reaching back to 2020 at least, you're seeing the American people recognizing that they have agency. Because I really think since World War II, or at least since the 1970s, people have tended to sort of say, oh, I'm not interested in the government. I know basically it's always going to do the same stuff. Everybody's corrupt or everybody's not corrupt, whatever your take is. But people have felt divorced from the actual direction of our democracy. And what you're seeing now is people saying, wait a minute, this is my government. And when they do that, the elected officials who still want to be reelected as opposed to simply dictating that they should remain in power, you see their behavior changing. So, for example, the very idea of continuing appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security, that really wasn't questioned. This was simply going to go through until the American people said, NFW, you are not going to give any more money to ICE. And that realization on the part of Americans is a step towards stopping what I just outlined. But I'm going to push that a little further since we're talking about memorials. One of the things that I think we're starting to see, although not perhaps as much as we need, I mean, certainly not as much as we need, maybe perhaps not as much as I would like to see right now, is that it's one thing to talk about what we don't like about what the administration is doing. It's quite another thing to talk about what country we want. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see more people stepping up and saying, hey, America is great because of immigrants, because of all the marginalized people, Black Americans, women, poor white men, because of all the people who have said, I have a voice. I'm doing my best here. I should be treated equally before the law. I should have a right to an education and to health care. I think that we need to put more voices behind the triumph of what really made America great. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to again, how do you get remembered? How does a nation get remembered? Does it get remembered because it's got the biggest statues? And you think of all the statues that, authoritarians have erected to themselves over the years, right back to Ozymandias, right? You think of that versus a country where people can say, I led a good life. Yeah. I had my health, I had joy, I had children, I had, whatever it is that makes you tick. And I would love for this movement not simply to stand against the rise of authoritarianism, but to reassert the extraordinary power of democracy, which is, of course, the way in which the Allies won World War II.
You're so right about making the positive case. I mean, I think that was one of the huge mistakes post-2024 is Democrats let the Republican attacks on migrants and immigrants go completely unchallenged. And it was like, where is the positive case for the fabric of the United States? Is anyone home here? Do we not know what happens when you get rid of all the people of color in a society, when you basically hollow out the American economy and whitewash us culturally and socially? We're not the same country.
No.
But
we've never been that country. We've never been that country.
And when we have tried to do that, it has always redounded to our disadvantage. To that end, I think that, Adam Kinzinger brought up this point that I think is so important. Like, Pam Bondi was on the Hill last week, and she was just yelling at members of Congress.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
You're a lawyer, not even a lawyer. I'm going to get in the gutter for her theatrics.
Not answering their questions.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you.
You don't get to reclaim time when you don't.
Bigger than Watergate.
When I don't answer a question the way you want.
Effectively giving them a rhetorical middle finger.
You're a failed politician, hypocrite. Shame on you. You don't get to reclaim your time. Your time is up. This is so ridiculous.
Adam Kinzinger made the point that when she was doing that, she's not just giving, Jamie Raskin the middle finger. She is giving the 700,000 people in the state of Maryland that he represents the middle finger. These are the people's elected representatives to Congress. And as much as people say, I don't like Congress, whatever, these people are designated with representing the American public. And you cannot just tell the country to fuck off. And I do think it didn't set, and we've seen this in the sort of immediate reaction to her testimony. We have seen a real discomfort on the part of some real conservative people with how she behaved. And not just because it was a tantrum, but it's like, this is anti-democratic. This is not the way it works. You are a representative of the executive branch, and you are accountable and will be held accountable to the American public. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting too much weight on that moment, but I thought it was it encapsulated the sense of impunity that this administration and its stooges operate with, but also the way in which I believe and think even now the American public is going to reject that. It's not how we do things here.
I think that's exactly what she was doing, and also totally sucking up to Trump. It was an authoritarian moment for sure, but there is something else buried in her performance that I thought was really interesting, and that's that by refusing to answer any questions and by just screaming out lies and talking points and all that with her burn book there, you know what she wasn't doing? She wasn't committing perjury.
Yeah,
and I thought that was really interesting. And when I believe it was Representative Ted Lieu of California said, I do believe you just committed perjury and we have it on videotape. She kind of lost it.
I believe you just lied under oath. There is ample evidence in the Epstein file.
Don't you ever accuse me of a crime.
I think that there is an increasing realization on the part of a number of people in the administration that if accountability ever comes, they're in real trouble. And if I were Pam Bondi, I would expect to be the first one under bust. That is, you can see that her neck is way out there in terms of breaking the law. And one of the things you just mentioned there that I think is really important is this administration has tried to use the Department of Justice to place criminal charges on members of Congress, which, that's just never been done. And that attempt to undermine the legislative branch with criminal charges is authoritarianism 101. This is like a huge red flag for people. So you can see we're sort of on this knife edge. Is it going to be those people who represent us by reiterating what the law was in that video who end up having to face criminal charges? Or is it going to be Pam Bondi, who has, aside from anything else, quite openly flouted the Epstein Files Transparency Act?
Against the overwhelming bipartisan support of Congress.
Yeah, can you imagine being the one guy who voted against that? Oops.
Mistakes are being made.
That's right. Every day.
Heather, we could talk for 18 hours, but you are like probably the most, I don't even want to say prolific, because prolific just means you're the quality of analysis that you are putting out there is such a service to the American public. And I'm so grateful that I could get you for a couple of minutes or a lot of minutes to talk about this stuff. But I want to ask you before we go, as we think about the positive argument for democracy and inclusion and equity and all the values that we thought were sort of foundational to this country, if you could build a monument, if you could build a sort of architectural expression of hope and positivity to help guide us into the next generation, do you have a thought of what that would be or who it would be for?
Well, it's hard for me to think in concrete terms like that, because when I think of monuments, I think of memory and history. So when I think of a monument to democracy and to this moment, I think of what we are building today as Americans, as everyday Americans, and I include myself in that, rewriting the history of this country to be one that we have dreamed of in the past, that really does treat people equally before the law, which it's never done before, and that really does give people equal access to resources, which it's never done before, and which really does give everyone a say in their government, which we've come close to after the 1965 Voting Rights Act, but that of course has fallen way behind us now. So I think about creating a monument in our national memory that says this was our great moment of trial and we came through it and created a better nation. Now, if you were going to try and render that in actual physical shape, for me, it would be faceless people, ordinary people, but clearly from every gender, every race, every,
well, maybe it would
whatever.
just be a place of convention and not a place of, it wouldn't be a phallic monument to a single person.
I'd make it a community
Yeah.
and I'd make it a river. I'd make it a bunch of people standing around a river so that there's always the passage of time and always being part of that larger human river that changes constantly, but that is not characterized by one great person, but rather with what we can all do if we do it together.
I love it. A river. Did you hear that? Monuments Commission? The Monuments
Well,
Commission.
how do you build a river?
2040?
I mean, you let me fantasize.
You just
I'm not
carve
a sculptor.
waterway. You can just carve another water. I don't know. That's probably bad for some species, but you could, I don't know. There are ways that you can build monuments in nature without destroying things. Someone quick tell Trump.
Andy Goldsworthy. Let's grab him quick.
Exactly. Land art. She moonlights as an art history and architecture professor. The great Heather Cox Richardson. It's such a pleasure. I'm so grateful. Thank you for spending a little time with me today. It's really been such a pleasure.
Thanks. It's been fun.
That's our show for this week. As always, if you've been impacted directly by the Trump administration or its policies, send us an email or a 1-minute voice note at runawaycountry@crooked.com, and we may be in touch to feature your story. A massive thank you to everyone who has written in already. We hear you, we see you, we appreciate you. Last but not least, please don't forget to check out the show and our rapid response videos on our YouTube channel, Runaway Country with Alex Wagner.